Hello, everyone. Welcome to LeaderTalks, AAPA's discussion and podcast on uh, leadership principles. My name is Eric Kwan Lee, and here with me is Richard Cheung. We're both board members of AAPA, and Richard is a serial entrepreneur down in the Los Angeles area, and I participate in the startup ecosystem in San Francisco. Richard, good having you on our one of our podcasts.
Good to see you, Eric. I hope the drive back home was not too bad compared to LA traffic.
LA traffic in the 405 is just insane. So you can't compare it to anything else in the world.
Yeah, that's right.
Richard, why don't you give a bit about your background and maybe hint at why you became an entrepreneur?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity, Eric. As Eric said, I serve on board with Eric with the Asian American Professional Association, and we are the two business people, if you will, board. And serial entrepreneur is a good word. In my day job, I am a chiropractor. I have a full-time practice in Pasadena, California. And then my second job is I'm a little bit of a nonprofit junkie. And so I like volunteering and serving on boards. And something that I learned at a young age was that I did a lot of little things. I started doing janitorial services when I was in high school and in junior high. I cleaned up a hair salon, and I also and when I went to college, I worked as a shorthand cook, and I cleaned dormitories, and I even passed out phone books during the break. And one thing I soon realized was that I don't think I want to work for people. I want to be kind of my own boss. And so when I went through graduate school, I uh, I remember my clinic director, which was my chiropractic school. My clinic director called me up to her office, and she said to me, "Richard, I really like what you've been doing in the last year here in clinic, and you seem to have a knack for things. You're clinically sharp. Patients like you." And she said to me, "So what are you going to do when you graduate?" And that was the first time in my life that I got hit with the question, and I was a little dumbfounded. I didn't know what to say. And she said, "Well, if you're not sure exactly what you are doing, then what you should consider is staying on board with the college." And I said to Dr. Bonanno, I said, What do you mean?" And she says, "Why don't you stay and continue to build your practice here at the school's academic clinic in Pasadena?" And so I said, "Sure." And so she kind of gave me a few treatment rooms at the upstairs in the clinic, and I hung there for a couple years until I start to grow. And of course, in life, you always run into moves, and the college wasn't so gracious, and so it was time for me to move on, and that's when I really got hit with the entrepreneurial bug, because for the first time in my 26, 27, 28 years life, I had to make decisions as a small business owner, and here we are, 26 years in private practice, and instead of I'm looking for the sun setting part of my life now. But through the years, I've done a lot of different entrepreneurial things, some good, some bad. And the saying says, right, every successful entrepreneur has failed. And I certainly have failed many times, but there have been many, many life lessons that have occurred. And I've been reminded that everything you do, good, bad, or indifferent, leads you to something different and something better. And so what that is, I don't know, because that's the continuum of an entrepreneur. You just kind of keep going and going and going.
That there's a lot to unpack there, Richard, in a good way. And I think it goes to one of the reasons that we started the Leader Talks, right? Was to talk to successful entrepreneurs like yourself understand your journey and understand, the mindset element that it takes to be an entrepreneur, and maybe not necessarily answer the age-old question, can you train entrepreneurs or not, but understand your journey from a personal psychological perspective and to maybe influence those. So as we think about that, taking yourself back to when you got that first janitorial job. I mean, your story is very similar to mine. I worked throughout college, or I did odd jobs in high school. But what drove you to, go out and do a part-time job at such a young age?
Well, as a young child, my parents didn't give me an allowance. The money factor came in, and so that was that, right? I mean, all entrepreneurs want to be financially independent and financially successful, right? And then what drew me in that is that whatever I did was my own doing, good, bad, or indifferent. The successes, the trials and tribulations, as they say, uh,
Mm.
all falls onto you, right? And that kind of stuck with me. That I am my own boss. I use the term you either feast or you either eat ramen. I don't say famine, I say ramen, right? So feast or ramen.
Hey,
And
ramen's expensive in San
right, and
Francisco.
ramen is expensive now. So you're right, Eric. So maybe we can add the word feast or famine now. So yeah. So it's interesting, right? And then in becoming an entrepreneur, I indirectly, directly grew into becoming a leader. And sometimes it wasn't by choice, right? Life has a path for you. You pick the path and you just go with it, and then you're given, opportunities and obstacles. That's how I view life. And I will tell you something. My clinic director, who hired, quote unquote, hired me right out of grad school, she told me one and it still sticks with me to this day. So, Richard, I just want to let you know that life is not fair. And she paused, right? And then she said, but I need to know what you're going to do about it. Are you going to mope? You're going to get over it. You're going to learn from it. So 100%, life is not fair. So how do you grow? How do you learn? How do you move on from it? And 27, 28 years later, I'm still living that as one of my models in life. Life is not fair. What are you going to do about it?
And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, we always want to try and create a just and equitable society, but at the end of the day, we're still dealing with a lot of unfairness that we'll continue to have to um, overcome and fix. But I want to go back to something that you said, right? Is that you realized at a very young age that it was in your control, right? The academic literature calls it internal locus control. When did you realize that at such a young age? When did you internalize it's like, you know what? I have control of my destiny, to a relative extent, right? There's certain things we
Right,
can't
right.
control, like if an earthquake happens or something like that, right? But when did you really say, hey, it's really up to me to get up in the morning, put on some pants, and go to work and hustle? Like, when did you get that mindset, or when did it click for you?
Yeah, I think I will tell you, I'm a big proponent of individuals playing team sports.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do any team sports except for a little bit of flag football in junior high and elementary school. I ended up on the tennis team, right? I played singles and doubles, and
Mm-hmm.
what that did was you're in charge of your right. You're in charge of your own destiny on the tennis court, right? If you double faulted, that's on you.
Mm-hmm.
Came up and you made that great volley and you won the point, that's on you. And so the word I like using is I really learned to take ownership.
Mm.
gotta take ownership, right? And again, that motto, life is not fair. What are you gonna do about it? Right? I can't control why good people have bad things happen to them, why
Hmm.
babies die, why someone that is a chain smoker for 50 years does not get lung cancer, the guy that eats healthy and uh, hikes and whatnot, ends up with lung cancer, stage 4, and dies within 6 months. You know, I don't know, I don't get it, but we gotta keep moving on. We gotta keep grinding away, you know.
So you mentioned something in your journey, right? Which is your clinic director gave you that opportunity to set up some beds and all that. Now we talk about internal locus control, but would you say that the environment you're in, the support that you get, particularly when you're starting at a very young age, is critical in your journey as an entrepreneur?
Oh, 100%. That's a great question. I appreciate you saying that. The people you hang around with, the environment that you're in, the neighborhood that you grew up in, right? You know, I'm all for everyone being on the same playing field, but the fact of the
Mm.
matter is, not everyone is on the same playing field. And I just very blessed to grow up in a middle class neighborhood, diverse group of friends. Didn't roll with any gangs or any crazy. Well, I did have some crazy friends in high school, but right. And my parents are immigrants, right? They immigrated from Hong Kong and China, and and let me say this really quick. Kudos to my parents who who at times struggled raising my brother and I because of the Western influence, right? Hot dogs and American pie and a lot of TV. And then at the same time, trying to remind us who we are as Chinese, Cantonese. And so where we would celebrate, certain customs and Chinese holidays, and and that's a tough balance, right? Because
Mhm.
this country, we take a lot of things for granted, right? And you're Canadian, and
Mhm.
you have your thoughts and opinions about we Yankees, south of the border, right? And so yeah, environment and friends plays a crucial role in shaping who you are.
It's interesting that you bring that up, right? It's the age-old question of nature or nurture, right? And as much as we tell those success stories of someone who's grown up from the hood, right, and become successful, whether it be a business person or anything like that. Um, in your opinion, some of us are very lucky, right? Like you said, some of us are very blessed to be in middle class backgrounds. But do you think if we're not necessarily in the right environment, right, for whatever given circumstance, is there still an ability to build that internal loci of control to be a successful entrepreneur, a successful leader?
Clearly, the deck is stacked upon people who don't, right? So this is why, if you take a really holistic approach and you look at things, I always say this, does the kid below the track have the same opportunity as the kid that lives in the foothills, right?
Hmm.
Clearly, the kid that lives in the foothills has an up on it. The kid on the track can, but a little bit more detouring that he or she
Hmm.
do. And that's why, certain programs, education, after school enrichment programs, things of that sort, Boys and Girls Club, one of the other boards that I sit on is LA's Best. It's an after school enrichment program for the city of Los Angeles. And that's exactly what it does. It creates opportunity where these young kids, in fact, I just visited a school the other day, where they get to experience science, the arts, dance, get help with homework, that little bit of an edge that the kid below the track typically wouldn't get, but the kid that lives in the foothills has it all day long because their parents can afford to send them to, camp or to have their own private tutor or whatnot. And so the nurturing is a really good word, and I say this to almost all successful people, whether or not you are an entrepreneur or you're a 9 to 5 or you're in the corporate world, is that there's something about giving back, right? There's
Hmm.
something about giving back. Um, and I'm all about the karma wagon. What comes around goes around, right? You just got to circle that wagon a few times. And and I'm okay with self-preservation too at the same time. Because at the end of the day, there is the common good that comes out of it. Anyways, I'm getting a little out there for you, Eric. I
No,
apologize.
no, no, no. I think it's all relevant, and I think your analogy of from below the tracks and in the foothills, and and your own journey as an entrepreneur in terms of those ups and downs, right? You mentioned a few failures, you mentioned successes. I think a lot of people, when they look at a Mark Zuckerberg or a Bill Gates or even a Steve Jobs, they think, "Oh, you were always successful all the time." And it's not necessarily the case, right? They've had their challenges, they've had their failures, they've done a lot of branding. But, as an entrepreneur, as a successful one, right? Um, you know, we have failure con now, right? That happens with startups. And I think a lot of people, to your point, especially if they're at the under the tracks, as you say, they feel like I don't have the other opportunity. So what advice would you give people if they've encountered failures, or like you said, they've just encountered failure after failure? What advice, mindset would you tell them to kind of like try and figure out what their next step which might be a successful one for them?
Yeah, number one, you got to be patient, right? You got to be patient. Sometimes you hit the home run, and sometimes you get on deck and you swing and you miss, right? Those are some of those success people. The other word I like to use is you got to persevere, right? If you really want, let me back up. If being an entrepreneur was easy, the whole world would be a bunch of entrepreneurs, right? And some people, and I'm not judging here, some people don't want to be an entrepreneur, and some people want to work a 9 to 5, and that's okay because they have no desire, to get their stomach upset when they come into a fair and they've lost tens of thousands of dollars or more, right? So patience is really, really important. And then the big four-letter word, grit. You
Mm,
gotta have a little bit of grit, right? And you got to, surround yourself with good people. You know, good leaders do what in any situation, right? Good leaders do what. I learned this serving as board president for a local nonprofit. Number one, you surround yourself with better people than you
hmm.
because you know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. And number two, being a good leader is also learning to manage personalities. Like being an entrepreneur is not managing your board, but managing all the external factors that are around you. So if you can manage those two things, you have a pretty good shot of becoming successful. And notice I said a pretty good shot. One of the things I tell people is just because you do all the right things and you go through A through Z is not a guarantee of success. Because what did Dr. Bonato tell me? Richard, life is not fair. What are you
Hmm.
going to do about it? Right? It's like opening up a restaurant. Great location, great food, great price point. And then 6 months later, the doors are closed. Right? You don't
Yeah.
know, right? You don't know. And then, I was walking Old Town Pasadena, and I don't want to name the establishment, but that establishment has been there for decades. And I can't believe they have survived, right?
Hmm.
So go figure, right? Go.
Yeah.
So, anyways, very, very different analogies, but wanted to share. So you got to be patient, you got to persevere, and you got to have a little bit of grit.
So it's interesting, right? You've set the standard, and no disrespect when I say that, but I mean, every entrepreneur has said patience, perseverance, and grit, right? But we seem to be in an age, and especially with more younger generations, where patience, perseverance, and grit, they look at it and say, really? Because it seems like if I can make a quick buck, then I'm going to go pursue it. What would you say to that generation or anyone that kind of pursues the quick buck and kind of like ignores the
Sure.
patience, perseverance, and
So,
grit?
so I reached for something, 10 seconds ago, and
Mm-hmm.
I reached for this. This
Mm-hmm.
is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
This adults, children, and otherwise, they are looking for that instant gratification,
Yeah.
right? They want that dopamine hit like no other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then let's break this down even further. COVID didn't help the matter because that's all people could do because they couldn't interact, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're very lucky that we're doing this Zoom call. You're in San Francisco and I'm in Southern California, and so
Yep.
so right, the world has changed, society has changed, right? I had a good friend who interviewed for a job at I can say the establishment, Ding Tai Fung, that dumpling
Mm-hmm.
place. Okay.
Yep.
She interviewed for a job that managed their social media. That's all
Mm-hmm.
they do. And it paid a solid six-figure annual salary with all the perks and I'm sure all the dumplings you can have, right? So, right, and in fact, there's majors like that talk about. So it's the instant gratification, and that's a very dangerous thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the human traits is learning to be patient. You want
Mm-hmm.
to be successful. You get we use this in our board. A lot of sweat equity, right? You got to put in a
Yep.
little bit of sweat equity, and that's part of that perseverance, right? And then you got to keep grinding away a little bit. Sometimes things don't go your way. Let's say, I have a friend that's opening up a wine bar and a bakery in Old Town Pasadena, and it's taken them years because of permitting and construction and things of that right? So if you're looking for instant gratification, then do your TikTok thing and go blow it up, right? But if you want a sustainable business, and here's the other thing, Eric, we'll talk about in a second, is entrepreneurs want to create an impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of impact do you want to create besides that dopamine hit with this thing in my hand, right? So, anyways, I'm getting a little preachy, so I best stop here.
No, but you hit the nail on the head, right? Because in some respects, this goes to your comment about impact, but also leadership as well. Because in some respects, what you're talking about is, do you want to just go from trend to trend, right? I mean, I see this in Silicon Valley every day, right? We're in the Gen AI phase. In the past, it was blockchain. Before that was websites or whatever, right? Um, and again, the sustaining long-term businesses think about the impact, but over the long term, right? How can they make sure that their business survives regardless of what technological, social, economic trends come along, right? They want to deliver value. Now, people may discuss and differ in what is considered value, but that's besides the point. So if in some respects, what you've stated concerning, that impact and that leadership, you're also emphasizing adaptability, right? Being true to your core vision as an entrepreneur, but being flexible to adapt. Where's the balance in that? Because I know a lot of people would say, well, if I'm being adaptable, am I staying true to my vision as an entrepreneur, as a leader, right? Um, how do you address that to maybe more skeptical minds?
Yeah, well, so this goes back to there's certain individuals that are molded to be entrepreneurs, and there's certain individuals that are not. And again, it's not a judgment call, right? Just because you want to be an entrepreneur and the guy wants to be a 9 to 5, that's okay, right? Because the term that I want to use now is what's your risk tolerance, right?
Hmm.
In businesses, we talk about managing your risk profile. Well, in being an entrepreneur, what is your risk tolerance at the same time, you know? And it gets so that's one thing. And you're right, it's achieving balance. You know, the entrepreneurs that fail, like myself, at some point, you got to say, okay, common sense kicks in. I cannot be more time, energy, and resource and otherwise. We got to call it, right? And so, that's a little bit of humble pie that comes into the fray of things. But you got that balance is I think, in my opinion, I think that's kind of learned, right? And
Hmm.
that's why you got to fail.
Hmm.
Because if you didn't fail, you don't know where to draw the line in the sandbox, right? You'll
Hmm.
just keep right, and you'll keep dumping on things. I am constantly reminded when I watch Shark Tank, what some
Hmm.
of the sharks say, and they keep telling them this thing is dead. In Kevin O'Leary, this thing is dead in the water. You're just sinking money away. And when all the sharks tell them that this is a terrible idea, you just better cut your losses. But yet, those serial entrepreneurs on the show, some of them, they don't listen and they keep going and going and going until finally they either bankrupt, they're divorced, or they're lost in space, right? And so
Not
that's
in a
why
good way either.
yeah, not in a good way, right? So that's why, I tell people there's a lot of things you can accelerate in life, but you cannot accelerate experience. There's something about
Interesting.
live life experiences that go a long, long way.
So, I mean, you talk about experience, and I 100% agree with you. And experience leads to, one of the points that you've mentioned, leadership, right? And you basically said you weren't trained as a leader, right? You kind of got thrown into it, head first in some respects. Um, if you were to go back and do it over again, would you change anything in terms of being a leader? And then secondly, I think for those, I won't call them, desire to be leaders, any advice for them?
Wow. Great, another great question. When I was younger, I was posed the question, um, what would you do all over again, right? And back in the day, I would say I would probably do this, and this, right? Now, at an older age and a little bit more mature and a little bit more wiser, um, I can't say that I would want to change anything because that is my live life experience that has taken me to this place, right? Some people are born with leadership skills, and some people that's a learned trait. And for me, it was more of a learned trait where I was catapulted to become a leader. It's just like political figures, right? Who's interested in running for president, the
Hmm.
jockeying, right?
Hmm.
There's some people that aren't interested, but all of a sudden, their leadership style and how they connect with people, and people start, whispering to their left and right ear, you know what, you should consider running for office, right? Or
Hmm.
or people gravitate because they're attracted to their personality or whatnot, and next thing you know it, you're leading the pack. I'm reminded with the nonprofit that I served on the board for, that I got recruited. I can say their name, Friends Indeed in Pasadena, who we deal with homelessness and poverty issues. I joined the board.
Hmm.
I was a newly minted board member, and then October came around, and I got a tap on my shoulder, and a couple board members came up to me and said, Richard, next year you are going to be our board president. And that was never on my radar, right? That was never an ambition of mine, but it just kind of happened, right? Sometimes you are called to lead because people listen. They like to follow you because you lead by example, and you have a connectability with individuals. And so after 7, 8 years as board president, I finally resigned because it was time to do so. But what an amazing, humbling experience during that time. That a board member, and I'll say this, he came up to me after a board meeting, and he says, "I just want to let you know, you're doing a really good job as board president." This was like my second or third year as board president, and he
Hmm.
goes, "Let me tell you why you're doing such a good job." He says, "Because these people now want to be led." And I kind of paused, and I said, "Wow, that's interesting. They want to be led, but they didn't have a leader, right?" So those are, you know, acquired traits. Mine was probably more acquired because, a passive, introverted Asian kid that grew up, it wasn't my thing. And here I am, in leadership roles. I'm a loud mouth, Asian man, and but that's where life takes you, right? So, anyways.
It's interesting because you never know when you'll be given that opportunity to be a leader, right? Or the environment you'll be in, and it's about grabbing it. So, with the podcast, I always like to leave some final, the final word to the guests, such as yourself. So, even though we're both on the board, I think you've provided a fascinating outlook concerning your background, what it takes to be an entrepreneur from a mindset perspective, but as well, and a leader as well. So, any final closing thoughts for those of watching?
Yeah, if you're blessed to surround yourself with good people, do so. If not, then go find yourself good people, right? Let me take, my position as a former board president. Surround yourself with good people, right? Then learn how to manage personalities, but learn how to connect with different people, right? You know, and then I'll end with saying for my clinic director, Dr. Lorraine Bonanno, just remember this: life is not fair, but what are you going to do about it?
Those are excellent parting words. Richard, thank you again.
Good to see you, Eric, and looking forward to having you come down to LA soon.
Definitely. And out. All right. How long was that?
34 minutes.
Good. I have a good sense of timing.
That was good.